Hello YouTubers. I have another selection of albums this evening, and these ones are a little bit more obscure, I would think, than the ones I've been showing you. The first album is the Tufano Giammarese Band, and this album was released in 1973. It was produced by Lou Adler, recorded in California, and they only had 3 albums, Tufano Giammarese. This is the first, and I think the cover on this album is absolutely beautiful. It looks much like I think a Cuban cigar package or box, and I have to apologize to Americans that might be watching this. Cuba is an island that's south of Florida that I don't think you're allowed to go to or have anything to do with, but it's been that way for about 50 years, so you might not know much about Cuba, but it's a beautiful, beautiful record cover. That's the flip side. This is their second album. Picture of Tufano, Dennis Tufano, and Carl Giammarese. And on this album they record a cover version of a song that they recorded when they were in a 60s band earlier on. And to give you a bit of a hint, the song they did on this is Kind of a Drag. This is Tufano Giammarese's third album. It's called The Other Side. The second album, which I showed you, get back to this one, it was recorded in Toronto, produced by Jack Richardson, Nimbus 9, and he recorded the Guess Who, the early Guess Who recordings. The third one was recorded in Los Angeles again. The producer was Tom Scott. Tom Scott, people must know Tom Scott as being a famous studio musician, Los Angeles. He had his own albums out as well. Now, I'll tell you who Tufano and Giammarese really are. They are members of the Buckinghams. There's Dennis Tufano, the voice of the Buckinghams, just one of the greatest singers of the 1960s. Fantastic records, pop records that the Buckinghams released later on in the 60s. I just inserted this one to show you who they really are. I've had this album for years. The next one is called Formula 30, and it's a Polytel album. Polytel albums were, in Canada at least, they were kind of like K-Tel albums, but Polydor released them and usually advertised them on television. This is a double album, and it's an excellent selection of music. Flipping it over here, very much British music, primarily British music, a real mix of stuff from the 60s and the early 70s. Things like Maggie May, Rod Stewart, Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress by the Hollies, All Right Now, Free. The Troggs, Wild Thing, C.C. Ryder, Eric Burdon and the Animals, Itchy Coo Park, The Small Faces. But then you get down here and we have some newer things like I'm Not in Love by 10cc, Pinball Wizard, The Who. But they even have some American things like The Byrds, So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, Blondie, Call Me. It's just a really excellent double album compilation. Jefferson Starship, Nuclear Furniture. This is a very nuclear record. I hadn't seen this album before. You know, we're all familiar with their albums from the 60s. And the story on this album was it was the last album in the 1980s, mid-80s, released under the Jefferson Starship moniker. And after the album was complete, Paul Kantner didn't like the way it was produced and mixed, so he stole the tapes, and he wouldn't give them back until they went back in the studio and redid some of the stuff. If I open this up, very atomic, very nuclear looking. I don't know how the music is on this, but we'll find out. The next album, we're getting into some jazz here. Rajan Roland Kirk, jazz saxophone flute player. He was famous for playing multiple instruments at the same time, like a one-man band. Apparently, he was much better than Kenny G. he could actually play the flute through his nose and play saxophone at the same time. He was quite an amazing character, and he passed away, I think, in 1977. Very plain cover. This album is, I think, from 1967. It's Eric Burdon and the Animals, Winds of Change. This is a stereo copy. I already have a mono copy, but this is a nice stereo copy. And it's a gatefold sleeve. And what's interesting about this, Eric Burdon dedicates this album to many people, including the first one, Roland Kirk, who was such an inspiration. It's the back cover. This album has, the hit single was San Franciscan Nights, but Good Times, I believe, was also the single, Paint It Black. It's a good album. Another jazz album. This one is Charlie Haden, Liberation Music Orchestra. Charlie Haden is a very well-known bass player and in the jazz area. That's Charlie Haden there, and this is arranged, and Carla Bley did arrangements, did some production, and wrote some of the material on this, and that's Carla Bley over on the side there. The musicians featured on this album are very well-known jazz musicians now. This would be when in their younger years, certainly. 1969, this album was released on Impulse Records, and Charlie Haden has a daughter by the name of Petra Haden. Petra Haden recorded in a group called That Dog in the early 1990s, and I have one of their CDs, and it's pretty good. But then she went on to release an album where she does all the vocals, multi-layered vocals, and she does the Who Sell Out album, including all the commercials, the instruments, the music, everything done with her vocals, just multi-tracked and layered. And it's really an interesting album. If you like the Who, it's an essential album or CD to have. That's the flip side of that one. Next one is Big Hits by Brian Poole and the Tremolos. They were a British Invasion type band. This album, I think, is from about 1963. It was not released in the United States. This is a Canadian copy. It was released in Britain as well, and it's essentially, there are 6 long tracks on this, and they are cover versions of the hits of 1962. I guess 22 hits from 1962. There's a picture of the band. Brian Poole eventually left the Tremolos, and the Tremolos went on and had a very good career without Brian Poole. And they are still, Brian Poole and the Tremolos are still touring in England in rock and roll revival shows over there. They're still over there playing today. Simple Minds, Once Upon a Time. This is from 1985. I think it was their most successful album. It had 3 hit singles on it. And there was a time, and people might have forgotten this, but there was a time when Simple Minds and U2 were kind of neck and neck to be 2 of the best bands in the world. And Simple Minds, I guess, kind of lost the plot in the 90s, but U2 went on to bigger and better things, of course. But I really liked Simple Minds back in the 1980s. They're one of the best bands of the 80s, certainly. The last one I'm going to show you is Commander Cody and his Lost Planet Airmen, Country Casanova. It says here in the corner of the sleeve, caution, side 1, band 5 is recommended for mature audiences only. And when I flip the cover over, I'll show you why. Really beautiful cover on this album. It's on Paramount Records. That's about 1962 or 63. Lincoln Continental, probably the Suicide Doors and stuff on that one. Flipping the album over, here's the band there in front of their tour bus. And the songs on this one, the song that put up the warning is called Everybody's Doing It, and they dropped the F-bomb a lot in that word, so I guess they didn't want people to play it on the radio without a bit of a warning. Some of the other tracks on here are Rock the Boogie, Rave On, which I guess is the Buddy Holly song, and Smoke, Smoke, Smoke That Cigarette. And Commander Cody, his early albums on Paramount are really, really very good. It's kind of big band, kind of country rock kind of thing. And the later albums on Warner Brothers had really nice covers, but the material, I don't think the material's as good, but this is a very good album. Thank you for watching.